Contrast. Contrast is the most effective way to add visual interest to your page. Contrast is also crucial to the organization of information. A reader should always be able to glance at a document and instantly understand what's going on. Add contrast throughout your typeface choices, line thicknesses, colors, shapes, sizes, and space. The principle of contrast states, if two items are not exactly the same, then make them different. Really, really different. Here's a great example on the left. This design lacks contrast because the size, the color, the font, and the style of typeface are all exactly the same. It looks boring and plain and can easily get overlooked. By changing the font, increasing the size, and adding shapes of color, we have used contrast to create a more eye-catching design. So going from the same font, same size, same color, we've increased the size of the word black in a serif font. We've added this black square to the bottom about halfway through, and we've added the ampersand and the word white in the color white and in a sans serif. So now we have a contrast not only between the size of the fonts, but also a contrast between the typeface, sans serif versus serif. Contrast has two purposes: to create an interest on the page. If a page is interesting to look at, it's more likely to be read, and to aid in the organization of information. The messages should be clear and easily recognizable. So here's an example of two newsletters. It's the exact same newsletter, but which one do you look at first? Hopefully, you're looking at this one, because this one uses contrast more effectively. Instead of just having the white bar at the top, they've added a black square and then put white font on top to make it pop. They've justified their text under here to line up with the text blocks. And instead of using the same font for the text body as they did for the headlines, here we changed it up and did a much more bolder serif font compared to this handwriting kind of loose, casual text body copy. Also adding in the color purple there will add some contrast. Add contrast through your typeface choices, through your line thickness, through your colors, shapes, sizes, space, and images. Again, another example. Here's a flyer you might see somewhere, detox your body, and then all this information, and you might want to look at it, but maybe not because it looks kind of boring. Change it up. Here's a greater example using contrast. We've changed the font. We've put the word your really small and the word body in a different color. We've added these kind of little flourishes to make it look a little bit prettier. And then instead of just having all this text be the same exact font, same exact size, same exact color, we've added it and kind of popped it out with the doctor's name, learn proven methods for detox. We've added bullet points. We've organized information. We've used proximity. We've used different alignments. We've used little dingbats here to break up the space. This looks much nicer, and more people will read this than they will read that. So don't be a wimp when it comes to contrast. If you're going to use contrast, do it with strength. Avoid contrasting a sort of heavy line with a sort of heavier line. Avoid using two or more typefaces or colors that are similar. If you're really going to use contrast, go all the way with it. If the items are not exactly the same, then make them different. Really, really different. Designers are given information in text form, so it's their job to apply the principles in order to make the design informative and appealing. This is something very basic. This almost looks like the text a designer would get. You get a little image, you get maybe the logo of the company, and a little bit of a write-up about them. Using the principles of design, we could make something much better looking, like here on the right. By applying the principles of design, we can create an exciting layout and use contrast to add visual excitement to the page. So adding the black bar, making the image larger, popping out the logo, making some of the fonts bold, changing up the layouts, adding this tagline, somebody needs a hug, and then adding this black bar at the bottom with the address. Everything gets pulled together neatly It looks really concise, it looks really professional, and someone's going to read this before they ever read that. And that's the whole point of graphic design, is to visually communicate your message in a very short amount of time and have it be successful. So if your company is Hugs the Dog's Bakery, I should hope that you're selling this version of it than this version, because you'll get a lot more customers this way. Again, just another example of using contrast effectively. Here we have a kind of a brochure for a book. It looks like a book signing. Again, kind of boring here, book savvy, Cynthia Lee. And then here, by changing up the font, by making the image stronger, by adding the black box, by just changing up some of the things and really creating more contrast and using those principles effectively, you get a better overall design. White space. White space is probably the most important principle that is usually the least often used, especially by students. White space is the art of nothing. White space is the absence of text and graphics. White space basically breaks up the elements on the page. It provides visual breathing room for the eye. Add white space to make a page less cramped, less confusing, or less overwhelming. White space doesn't actually have to be white. It only gets its name from the early ages of graphic design, where most printing was done on white paper. But white space can be any color. It can be black, blue, red, basically whatever color the background is. White space is also referred to as negative space. So here's an example of white space. Here's our image. And then we have all this nice white space around it, allowing that image and that text to have room to breathe. White space is our friend. Keep your message short and your white space plentiful. White space is always occurring in the design from the moment you open up that blank document. The design has begun with white space. There are two types of white space: the undefined white space, which is what you get when you open the new document, and the active white space, which occurs the moment you place an object on that undefined white space. So when you open your Illustrator file and you go File, New, and you get that blank square that's staring back at you on your screen, that's your white space. The moment you add a graphic or a letter or a piece of text, you've suddenly activated it, and it's become activated white space. Here's an excellent example of an advertisement that really effectively uses white space. Beautiful use of white, and then just this horizontal line with this guy mowing, and then the logo and the information here. So really it captures your eye because of the white space. It's not overwhelming. It's not jumbled or hard to understand. It's very clean and very minimal, and when you look at it, it's very simple and it's has a very nice flow to it. White space is made of nothing, but you shouldn't treat it that way. There are several benefits that a generous dose of white space can bring to a design. Simply by increasing the space between elements in a layout, a design can take on a much more elegant appearance. And by injecting more white space into a design's typography, content becomes more legible. Here's an example of a website canvas. The logo over here, the model over here, a nice rule of thirds shot, beautiful white space in between. You don't need to fill it up with something. It's a great asymmetrical balance. It's very clean, very elegant, and it works. Novice designers always tend to forget the principle of white space. They often just try to fill the entire page, but it's important to remember that in design, sometimes less is more. A great example of white space is Google. Everybody goes on it every day, and you'll notice that it's unlike every other search engine because it's basically all white space. It has the logo, it has the search bar, and that's it. Beautiful example of using white space. Here's another example of a Southwest Airlines advertisement. Again, we have different sports balls and how fast they can go, and then the jet plane. Beautiful use of white space. Also, a centered alignment. So please remember these 6 principles when you're designing and try to apply them every time. You'll find that they often work hand in hand together, and eventually you'll begin to use them without even thinking about it. All great designs are founded on these very basic principles: balance, proximity, alignment, repetition, contrast, and white space. And before I leave you, I just first want to talk a little bit more about white space. In the design world, white space is a valuable thing because it can make or break a company's image. In print design, paper is a valuable resource, and clients usually want you to use every square inch of it because you're paying for that paper or that ad space. They really want to jam in there as much as possible. After all, because it costs money and they want to get their money's worth. But similar value is also placed on screen real estate when you're dealing with web design. They both have set dimensions and they represent limited space in which a message can be presented by displaying text and graphics. That is why being generous with your white space will speak volumes about your brand. By using large amounts of white space, you're saying that your content is far more important than the screen real estate that it rests on, and that you can basically afford to sacrifice that space in order to better present your message and your brand. So you can try this little experiment, and if you want to try and go into your web browser and type in any kind of luxury brand, and then look at their website, and then compare it to a lesser or a cheaper known brand. And you'll notice the amount of white space used by the luxury brand is much greater. Luxury brands use this concept to convey an image of sophistication and elegance. So here's two examples of furniture companies. Pottery Barn, being the more upscale of the two, uses a lot of white space between their elements and even between their lettering. So look at the white space between each character. P-O-T-T-E-R-Y. Not only did they add every white space between each letter, but also between the image and the selections, between the left sidebar. All of this is white space. It's all breathing room, even between here, between the images and the overall space. Now let's look at a company like Rooms To Go, which is a lower-end furniture store, and look at their website. Now you can immediately notice a lack of white space. There's so little space between the elements that you can't even insert these red arrows. Everything is kind of jammed in here. If you see as I'm scrolling through, there's very few space. Even the list of categories is crammed up against the left border. Things like this look kind of sloppy and cheap and unprofessional. Now let's take a look at two other brands that you'll probably recognize. Below is a comparison of the Apple homepage and then the Microsoft homepage. You'll notice that Apple, being the epitome of elegance and sophistication, uses plenty of white space. The entire layout of their website is based on white space. And you'll notice as we compare that to the Windows version or the Microsoft website, everything is kind of much more crammed in there. So you can tell a lot about a website or a company or the target audience just by seeing how they use white space in their design, because it is expensive real estate when you're looking at a web page that Mac or Apple could have had an ad right here, or they could have had an ad here and here and here, and they could have jammed it all in here, and just to show you more products and more things. But by keeping it very elegant and simple and clean, it speaks volumes about their brand and what kind of feeling they want you to have about their brand versus a more lower end company. So just as a little experiment, next time you're shopping online or browsing online, take a look at the white space in the websites that you're looking at and see if it relates to the type of brand or the type of customer that you feel that they're reaching out to. So that's about it with Principles of Design. There's a poster posted up in the top left corner above the whiteboard. Hopefully it's not falling down right now, but take a look at that and remember these 6 principles of design whenever you're designing, and hopefully eventually they'll come natural to you as you keep working with them. That's it. Thank you.